Thought-provoking V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Corbolic V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
So all I fucking hear, tippity tappity, rippity rappity, tap tap tap, taking notes all day, Christina.
He was complaining about the ticky-tacky sound of my nails on my keyboard.
I type loud as shit. I shouldn't have much to say there.
You
But welcome back to another episode of the Pro Physique Code with obviously your favorite ADHD host, Stephen Beaugrand, starting it off with something that has nothing to do with anything we're going to talk about today.
As one does.
I mean, that's what you guys like though, right?
That's why they're here. They might not know.
Not the listeners. Obviously, we're not worried about what you guys think. It's just all about entertaining ourselves here, just the three of us, right?
There you go.
So, I won't say I woke up today and chose violence, but I do want to some degree, choose violence today. Because I feel like this thing keeps fucking happening and people just don't talk about it. Or they don't talk about the reality of it, maybe how to help prevent it, and what the actual considerations should be when we're talking about bodybuilding as a competitive sport. Because in what world does a 38-year-old that should be quite healthy, you would think, die of a heart attack? What world does a 41-year-old that, if you look at him, you're like, man, from the outside they look really healthy, die of a heart attack? In what world does a 20-year-old go to a, festival thing, a sports festival, where they're not performing and doing anything, and die of a heart attack? And it's like, we've talked about it before. I know I have. But it really doesn't seem to be something that I'm seeing people actually talk about. And it seems kind of important to me.
Do you think that maybe it doesn't get talked about as much as it probably should because we naturally assume and generally would be right to think that there were exogenous things being added that contributed. And so then maybe is the vibe from people, like definitely the general population, I would say, but maybe even within our industry, it's like, well, they fucked it up. Like they did something wrong. This was on them. And then it's kind of like putting the onus on the person or their coach and like their protocols and saying that's the problem, as opposed to being like, maybe it's happening too often with different coaches to younger people. And why the fuck is it still happening? Because if people were dying at this rate, if we equate it over, like, let's look at another like super muscular sport, right? And we look at like football, like we're looking at giant football players who, if you compare them now to like 30 years ago, fucking monsters, right? So they're big, they're carrying around a whole lot of muscle and everything. They're not having people die of heart attacks throughout every single season.
So I don't know. So I'll say I'm not sure that's quite fair, because there are doctors on the field. There are team doctors. You have trainers. You have people overseeing pretty much every single aspect of what's going on with like other professional sports. And so even if, say, it's a Barry Bonds kinds of issue and we're doing some things, you're really not seeing those players performing at that high of a level on the fields of sport. And again, you're putting millions of dollars into these people, right? They're making sure that they're taking care of them. You had that one guy that had like that genetic component where he did die, and I think that was in the past year or two. Time really messes with my head nowadays. But again, that was like this genetic defect and like this thing. And it's pretty rare to see those kinds of things. Um, and so this isn't like crime thing or something else like that. A this person was doing their thing, getting ready for a show. One was a pro bikini competitor. She was getting ready for a show. She was supposed to compete in a couple of days, died of a heart attack. We've seen 212 bodybuilders getting ready for the Olympia die of a heart attack in their hotel rooms. This other 41-year-old women's bodybuilder. We saw it happen to a girl overseas in Spain a year or two ago. Amateur show, died of a heart attack. That poor girl at the Arnold this year died of a heart attack. And so I would say it's pretty hard for most of us to really get the details of this. But I think it becomes a little bit more apparent what some of the issues probably were, given what people do for bodybuilding shows, what people do for stage prep, peaking protocols, those kinds of things. And anybody who's cut water knows what that feels like to some degree, right? You know what that really massive dehydration feeling is. If you're cutting water and sodium and you're taking a diuretic and you're cramping and like the shaking and inability to pose, which that can be nerves for some people, but for other people, it's peaking protocols, right? That fact that like I haven't pooped in 3 days. All these things are like kind of crazy, but get normalized. And I'm like, at what point do we go back to fighting that normalization? Because we could talk about that other stuff, and I'm more than happy to rip open that can of worms on where does the where does the responsibility lie? Is it just the athlete that's following a protocol? Is it the coach that is giving the protocol? I would say there's some probably in both, but I have always found the best way to get people to not do dumb shit that puts their health at a high risk is to say, this is why we don't do dumb shit to put our health at a high risk. And so some of it's education, but also there's definitely a lot of like psychological in there too. Like, how much is this worth to me? So see, Danica, I'll give you something too. I got you, dog. Got you. She's like, I don't know what you want. I've popped this one up on these two today. They weren't ready for it. They didn't know what was going on. Some shit's just been on my Instagram feed. I was like, oh no, son. Oh no, daughter. It's like, mm-mm. But that's another part. At what point is hobby healthy, obsession unhealthy? Because people look at bodybuilders and physique athletes like, man, they're so lean. They're so muscular. They must be super healthy. I'm like, no, that is not the case. It is not healthy to be that crazy amount of musculature. There's a reason that Sean Roden also died of a heart attack, right? He was fairly young too. Walking around at 300 pounds ain't good for your heart. I have a Great Dane. Larger animals tend to live less time. Look at Andre the Giant. So when you have all of that tissue, all of that mass, you have to get blood to everything to keep it alive. That's hard on your heart. So being super big, probably not the best thing for your heart. Being super lean, definitely not good for your overall health, right? Leptin lowers, that can lower things like sex hormones. Our hunger signalings are like off the charts for a lot of people when they're that lean. Can create some really unhealthy relationships with food and like how you look at that and being really food focused, as well as like you need some body fat, right? If I'm squatting heavy, if I got a little bit of body fat here, I can really get into my belt. I can really get a good brace. It might even, depending on how much body fat I have, change some of my biomechanics for where the bottom of my squat is, or some of those other things that can make it safer. If I'm really lean, might not be the case so much. And then of course your recovery is not so great. We've also seen, and you guys know this, how many times have you heard about women's hair starting to fall out really gnarly towards the end of a prep, or even partway through prep because they've just been doing a crazy amount of activity and super low calorie?
Them losing their cycles, and like that's not just okay to just not have them, and the adaptations that happen there, and like things that happen, and it almost becomes, I mean, I've talked to people before who said that they appreciated being in prep routinely because they knew they lost their cycle when they were in it and that it was nice, and it's like, Girl,
Hell yeah. I like the cycle one. I would say if you care about having kids, yeah, it's probably not good if you're not having a normal cycle. But some women will lose their cycle just going into prep,
right.
right?
Yeah.
They're just really sensitive to it. And I would say, depending on how long your cycle's gone, that would be more of my concern. Like if you haven't had a cycle in 2 years and you're not on any kind of birth control or anything else, like I'd be like, ooh, yeah, that's bad. Like that's probably not the best. But if we don't have a cycle for a few months because we're in prep pushing hard, like I would say that's part of the sport. And I wouldn't normally expect that to have this really long term, like overall, I'm gonna die health impact.
Right.
Depending on the person, it could absolutely have an impact on, their fertility in the future. And I've seen plenty of women that have come to me that with fertility issues and like, like we tried to get pregnant forever and it just couldn't happen after all these old preps and stuff. So I said, fuck it, I'm gonna get back on stage again. I was like, well, I mean, maybe why don't we try doing some things differently since you've never eaten over 1,600 calories a day outside of your preps and you're always doing cardio and doing all this other stuff. Why don't we maybe try and reduce some stress on you? Like they're not going to die at 25 from not having their cycle, or 35 or 38 or 41.
But you could look at things where it's going to contribute more to, osteoporosis and stuff like that as they get older. And if they fall and break their hip at 46 because they've got bird bones from, not eating enough and not having cycles and things like that routinely, it's not death, but I mean, it's not adding to our life either.
Yeah, and so like oddly enough, I remember in school, one of my teachers, we were talking about amenorrhea, absence of the cycle. And she's like, "Well, the one good thing about it is it might lower your risk for some cancers." And I was like, "Cool." uh, but it's one of those things like that. I think is a more normal concern for people, where they're like, I am, or at least it has been over the past 4 years or so. I think I'm more concerned about like my cycle and what that means and my hormonal health and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, all right, cool. To some degree, that stuff can get a bit goofed, not great, messed up, negatively impacted, whatever during prep. But our goal should be, how do we have the healthiest prep? Like, how do we set you up for the best case scenario? Uh, and so maybe the healthiest prep does mean that we didn't have our cycle for a little while, but it damn sure doesn't mean that we fucking die. Like, and that's where for me I'm like, all right, why are we not having more of these conversations or putting more of these conversations out for people? Because as a coach, I don't know how, like, there's lots of things I would have a hard time with, but I don't know how I would live if I had a client that died going into a show and it was, we'll say, most likely due to what I was having them doing for that. Like, I wouldn't be able to coach anymore. Like, I have a problem with people being like, oh man, yeah, I just like having a hard time post show with my relationship with food. I'm like, I feel bad about that shit. So, and I know, I'm sorry guys, this is a lot of me talking right now. So let me like get through the nuts and bolts of the physiology of why some of these peaking protocols will put you at risk for a heart attack and death. And so the biggest one that we see going into shows is this dehydration that creates a situation where it's a lot easier to have a cardiac arrest or a heart attack. And that happens because you need blood, right? So what we have is something we call stroke volume, and that is the amount of blood that comes out of the heart with each beat. So hypertrophy or growth of the heart tissue from things like PEDs absolutely can grow the heart muscle as well. When that becomes a problem is it grows inward and you now have less room in those aortas and or ventricles for blood to fill to get blood to the rest of the body. So your stroke volume, the amount of blood that goes out, can come down from that. When you dehydrate, that is also going to decrease stroke volume. Now, the way that your heart will make up for that, because you still need blood to all of your tissues to live and to not, get necrotic and have problems, it will speed up heart rate. And so if any of you have ever been really dehydrated and you're sitting there and your heart's going like 1,000,000 miles a minute, you're like, what the fuck is wrong with me? All right, that can be part of it. And so eventually what happens is you don't have enough blood to support the tissues, and your heart is a tissue, right? Hopefully most of us are aware of that. It's normally what ends up happening is at old age, maybe plaque buildup in the arteries or the blood vessels will narrow that blood vessel so that less can get through it. If that happens on some of your cardiac tissue, that can then create necrosis in some of those pieces of the heart and create heart attacks, right? And that's why when they do a bypass, they're essentially, if they're putting a mesh in, they're trying to open that back up so that it has appropriate flow. And then there's TAVRs and there's other stuff too, and whatever. So that's normally what happens in old age. But for these people, I mean, dude, yeah, I think if you have sex hormones which are derived from cholesterols, that can absolutely create an extra risk or added risk of cardiovascular disease and things like atherosclerosis. But these people, what happens is the heart is beating so fast and you're trying to pump up backstage and you're out and about and you're doing cardio and you're doing this and all these other things. And so you do all this water at the beginning of the week and then you start tapering off in big ways and then you don't have any towards the end of the week. A lot of these people might be doing diuretics with that. Shouldn't, right? So now you're doing a diuretic that's increasing the amount of water, and there are also typically sodium that is now getting kicked out of your body. And people will also cut sodium with that. So now they're not getting any more fluids or sodium in, and then they're kicking a ton of it out. And then expecting their bodies to be like, cool, this isn't going to be a problem. Sodium is part of the electrical signaling that your muscles use to contract and relax. Your heart is one of those. So what do we think happens if we don't have enough blood to supply our body? If our stroke volume is so high that our heart's just going absolutely insane to try and supply blood. If we don't have the sodium to have the electrical signals needed for our heart to be working properly, we have a heart attack. We have a cardiac arrest. And so these peaking protocols and practices put us at or I will say, can put us at very high risk for a cardiac event, for a negative cardiac event. And it's, to me, it's like, oh, you have to be dry. And like, it's not that anyway, but it's so wild to me because it's been so normalized in this industry and with these coaches that don't understand the physiology. They don't understand this underlying how our bodies work, for why that's fucking dumb. And like, that's hard to me. And I want people to know better. I want people to be informed enough so that they're keeping themselves safe. Because this girl that just died 3 days ago, she's a year younger than me.
Why do you think it is that coaches are still potentially using these older like methodologies and stuff like that for peaks when I mean we know that there are plenty of coaches who don't peak that way, who have changed protocols and are actively putting their clients into better positions. And I mean, just as a like competitor myself from when I started to now, I feel like, and that's not even that long, that's not even 10 years, right? And like in that amount of time, I look back on how things were when I got started and it's like the fucking dinosaur age. And like then I see how things are now. And so why do you think it is? It's not like it's not there. It's not like the info, like people are hiding it and things like that. And so why do you think that they continue to hold on to that?
Danika, I'm interested to hear your opinion before I go off on another tirade. And I'm sure everybody else too.
My opinion. I got a lot of them. This is such a, I wouldn't say triggering, but it's like an emotional thing for me because or a topic for me because like Steven said, I can't even fathom feeling that feeling I would have if I placed a client in a position where it was jeopardizing their life. Like it makes my gut feel disgusting and to even like think about it. And I would never want to, like, it's like fuckery. Like I would never want to even dabble. So anytime one of my clients is like, oh, are we going to do a dehydration method? I'm like, the fuck we are. Like, nope, no. This is a hard no, no, pass, no, no. I don't know how else to give you that information. They usually are told to run to the store immediately and grab some like pickles and a jug of water or something. Like I do not want them to even put that in their mind. But I do feel like it's just lack of education, or it's a lack of absorbing the education that's out there. So like it's the dismissing or the not talking about the severity of it. I think people kind of think that it's just a random thing that can happen, and that I'm sure a lot of people are like, oh, it would never happen to me. My coach is the best in the industry, until it fucking happens to you and you're like, oh shit. So I wish more people talked about it. I wish that the conversation was actually like the conversation of extreme sports was had before entering extreme sports, because let's be honest, bodybuilding is an extreme sport. So I think people get into it without that conversation, like the prefacing everything before even dabbling, so that you are completely informed about it. And I also think you had talked about like responsibility, like who, like people will always ask like who is responsible for this, but maybe the industry as a whole, right? Like as a whole, the industry, which will not happen. I know that. I do feel like the people that are in the bigger positions, like coaches, should probably talk about, and I mean, you could even say pro athletes and everything should talk about the pros and the cons to all of the extremeness that happens. And I just think we teeter on death too much, and that is such a triggering thing for me, because that's like my fear. I know it's going to happen, but like that's my biggest fear. So this conversation is hard for me to be able to, like, it doesn't make sense for me. I can't like understand why people would be like, let's fuck around and find out. Let's see how close I could get, and let's see if we could just push it. And you want me to like taper and like play around with death? Cool. I also am so curious, like, to know the background information. Like our bodies don't, at least in my mind, our bodies don't just be like death, right? Like I feel like there are some signals that would probably happen. And are we not communicating these things? Like, are we just ignoring this information where our body is giving us information of like, hey, asshole, like you got about 48 hours. You should probably like do something now. And are we not vocalizing this? What are the coaches doing during that time? Because I'm sure that there are days before this happens where our bodies are giving us information that I would assume was just ignored.
Well, I would think it's probably a conversation like, well, are you willing to do what it takes, or it's just a short period of time? And I think with some of the things that we're talking about, like it can be a short period of time. Like when you look at things like throwing off the balance of electrolytes and the signaling that needs to take place and stuff like that can just happen in a matter of days if you're fucking around with things incorrectly. It's not necessarily going, even if they're checking their blood pressure and they're doing all of this stuff every single week, if they're in a fucked up peaking protocol, then it might just happen. And what I'm about to say, I feel like, I mean, especially with bodybuilding, is going to be an annoying take, but like is some of the onus just on the fact that we're rewarding people who are getting to unhuman-like proportions and pushing to places that the body just can't really do naturally. And if we keep saying that, then like eventually, like it's supporting the same thing, right? So it'd be like having the Beer Olympics. And if every time people come to the Beer Olympics, we have a good number of them that die from alcohol poisoning, and then throughout their training cycles, they're becoming alcoholics, they're dying of alcohol poisoning during the training cycle for the Beer Olympics and at the event, eventually somebody says, is this inappropriate? You know? And like, I wonder at a point, when do we, because like we're seeing it now, fit model has been introduced because bikini fucking took off and became something way different than it originally was. So do we keep stacking those and then keep pushing and pushing and pushing? Or do we recognize that maybe that's a hint of it?
Right. That's
So
exactly what I was saying with like the industry.
yeah,
Perhaps it's the
I
industry.
think it's important to stop that thought and understand that there is absolutely a divide, and that the bodybuilding industry is not just one um, person, one individual place. There are many different leagues that you can compete in with different rule sets, different expectations, different posing routines,
Right.
different things that they're looking for. So I don't think it's fair, and I am full of hate. So if anybody is going to be talking shit right now, it's normally going to be me, to say that overall that is the case. I also think that now we're getting into something that's a little bit different, and maybe going into more long-term possible health risks and outcomes that might come with this. Um, when realistically, most of the people dying, we'll say, quote unquote, in the sport, right, a week out from a show, it is those short-term peaking protocols that are the problem. And I don't want to get away from that quite yet, because this dead horse still has some beating to take.
What if I'm running really fast away from it though?
Right. I mean, that's cool. I can sprint fast for a short amount of time right now. Um, but I think this elitist personality, this elitist mindset is also part of it. Like, suffer to win. Like, if you really loved bodybuilding, you would do it. If you really love this sport, you would do it. And there's this mindset has been baked into fitness and anything to do with the gym forever. Sweat is your fat crying. Oh, yeah. Make that fat cry. You win that fight. I'm going into a battle with weights that have no mind and can't do anything back to me. Right? And it's like, people do this. They get emotion.
That voice is too much for me.
And it's like derpy Batman kind of almost, I feel like. That's what it sounds like in my head. But it's like, no pain, no gain. You gotta make it happen. You have to suffer to get into shape and put on the muscly muscles. And I'm like, fucking, how much evidence do we have to the contrary? A lot. A lot of evidence to the contrary. And honestly, I don't think for most people, you should have to love bodybuilding all that much. I think you can really like it. You can be passionate about it. It can be something that's made your life better. I get that on so many levels. But do I love bodybuilding more than I love my dogs, my wife, my family, my friends? Is it something that I have that relationship with? And this is where the mentality of it, I think, comes into play a little bit more. Do I love it more than all the other things in my life? Is it a number one? If it's a number one, then fuck it. Cool. You get to make whatever decision you want as an adult, but you should at least have an informed one and be able to be like, yeah, you know what? Like, I definitely love bodybuilding more than my kids. Like, I love my kids. I don't know, some people don't love their kids. You know, that's cool too, I guess. But no, bodybuilding is more important to me than that. And this one show is more important to me than that. And, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, cool. But most people, that's not the case. They get caught up in this, oh, you have to give it everything, and then it's so overwhelming. Like, it takes a lot of work. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's easy to get lost in that. And we've talked about the whole identity thing over and over and over throughout so many episodes. But I think that elitist, I'm going to be better, I'm going to win, I'm going to be the best. And it's like, okay, cool, you're the best you've ever looked. You're in better shape, you have more muscle, your cardiovascular fitness is good, right? And you're worried about beating some random people at a show that when it comes down to it is some people's opinions of what they like to see in a physique. And if we're putting our possible lives at risk for that, I think that's a problem. Whether you're at the amateur division or the pro division. And so that short term sacrifice to win, if you're a real bodybuilder, you'll do this. Like when Danika and I talked about what bodybuilding actually is last week. It's not being on stage, it's going into the gym and working on stuff. Like, yeah. And so when you have maybe leagues where the criteria has gotten a bit more, I think, aggressive, like, dude, the funny part to me is, and I don't even say funny, I say funny in like the ironic way, you don't have to can do drugs to get lean, right? You need to make sure that you're in a good enough starting position so you don't have too far to go, and that you give yourself enough time so that when you hit snags and plateaus, you can work through them and you can then progress to get where you need to be. So the idea that you need to do all these drugs for conditioning, to me, I think is dumb and tells me that people don't know how to get things done appropriately. But like that dry look is lean. It's being really low body fat. Like I looked grainy as shit in my last prep. You know how? Because I was fucking lean. I was shredded. And guess what? I wasn't cutting my water when I was looking super grainy. I wasn't cutting my sodium. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. Like I was doing normal day-to-day life. And so it's so multifaceted. There's this misconception of what it is. Like what is the look? What is the thing I need to bring to the party to do well so that everybody likes me, right? The proverbial 8-ball, if you will, if you're in Miami. Ooh, nobody likes the drug references, right? I don't know. What do people bring to parties anymore? I haven't partied in so long.
I
But
go
like,
to birthday parties. I don't go to fun parties. I go to little
yeah,
parties.
I don't want to be at those parties either, if I'm being completely honest. So like, there is this misconception of what you're supposed to be doing. And that's been bikini since like what, day one, where people are like, well, I don't really know why I didn't win. And that's a lot of people that are new to bodybuilding, get into it, and even some that have been around a while. Then there is this elitist mindset. And people saying, well, if you love it, you'll do it. And you want to be better, don't you? And this is what you have to do. And then there's also this part of it where, as coaches, you put us into a position of authority and say, so if I tell you something, you don't necessarily question it. You don't necessarily ask why or what's going to come along with this. You know, I had an 18-year-old come to me that was on SARMs the other day, and they had told the coach I didn't want to do drugs. I'm like, well, why? Why do they have you on drugs then?
Right.
Right? They didn't explain anything. They said, hey, take this supplement. Like, no. Like, I don't know what it is. I'm like, but because people trust us, because we're in this position of authority, questions don't get asked a lot of the time. And then there's also the fact that I think psychologically, because it takes so much dedication, lifestyle, identity to be in it enough to be successful at those higher levels, that also kind of says, oh, well, I'm just going to do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more,
Yeah.
and then keep going with it. And so I think for at least the short-term concerns to me of like, I'm going to die backstage at a show or in my hotel room, or I could, or in Christina, as you said at your first show, in the crowd watching the show after you got off stage, like, well, that's no good. And even if it doesn't get to there, I've seen so many people pass out backstage, just bloop, cramping up on stage, all the kind of. And so when you talk about what are some of those symptoms and things that are happening, well, are you getting dizzy and lightheaded every time you stand up? That's a problem. Are you cramping really bad all the time? That's a problem. Can you not think straight for an extended period of time? That's a problem. Are you feeling really weak all the time? That's a problem. Is your hair falling out at an abnormal and fast rate? That's a problem. Like, is your skin color, like how pale or flush you are all the time, having these really big drastic changes all the time? That could be a problem. And it's like, man, for a group of individuals who is supposedly paying so much attention to our own bodies, people overlook these things so bad sometimes because Like I said, like prep's not going to be easy. There's going to be hard times. So it's like, well, pain is gain. Like if you want it, you're going to sacrifice. Prep's supposed to be hard. You're like, well, fucking how hard? Like, am I supposed to feel like I want the fucking universe to end every goddamn day? Or should it be like, this is hard, but I can do this. And maybe there's a couple of hard days that were really fucking tough to push through, but then it got better again. Like, and so there's just this generalized fucking, yeah, you should suffer for it and this stuff. And I'm like, nah, you should pay attention to your health and you should make sure that you're still keeping yourself in a good spot.
The whole question too of like all the symptoms that you went through and people, you saying like, that's a problem, that's a problem. I feel like sometimes the narrative that goes with that is like, yep, you're in prep. Yep, to be expected. Yep, that's normal. But a really quote unquote good coach, I guess, would probably be like, no, this is not normal. And this is something that we probably don't want to see, given that you're 2 days before a show and like you're noticing that your period stopped or whatever that may be. I think it's important for the coach to be like, no, it's not normal. How long are we experiencing this stuff? And to what is the severity of that symptomology, so that we can look at like, can we pull back? Like, is this a moment of like big red flag? We're pulling back. This isn't worth it.
Right. And I think that's my thing, because there has to be context, right? Like that there has to. So like, again, maybe I lost my period the week of the show or a couple weeks before. That is actually kind of normal, right? Is that a big health risk? Can I explain to you like what we were only going to do to help encourage it coming back after the show, to support overall health and well-being and those kind of things, and that this should be a temporary thing? Sure. But dude, I remember there's one of my friends was dating a men's physique pro, and he was getting ready for a show, and they were telling me that he was cramping so bad throughout the middle of the night, day before the show, like he was crying. Like that's how bad. Like straight wrecked. Getting some Gatorade, right? Cool. That should be a simple fix. But what happens to the people that think, oh, I just have to push through this somehow? And so there is this point where there are things that shouldn't be ignored at all. They're just giant red flags. And then maybe something isn't quite a red flag just yet. It can be, but maybe it's a little orange right now. Maybe it's a little pink right now. You know what I mean? And so it's not quite there yet. And that's where it's really important for the athlete to say, hey, coach, I'm experiencing these things. And it's hard. And then the coach, if they're smart and competent, which a lot of them aren't, again, I will spew hate today. They're like, no, just deal with that. Keep going. Good job. Like, I love the coaches that give like the 2-word response. Great job. Keep going. Like, oh, it's okay. Push through. I'm like, I just told you that I've been cramping for half an hour straight and you told me to push through. Are you, what? I just told you that I passed out because I stood up too quick. And you told me to push through. What? That poor girl that hit her head in DC. She never woke up from that coma as far as I'd seen. I think the last time I checked was last year. Like, are you fucking kidding me? No. And so like, oh, I've had plenty of times where I'm in prep and like, yeah, I'll get lightheaded standing up. You know what I do? I go get some water and I get some sodium and salt and maybe I'll eat. I'm like, okay, cool. I gotta have a meal. I need to eat. I need to do something here so that I'm not putting myself at risk. But people, like, if you've been told, no, asparagus only, tilapia only, no salt on anything, like, oh shit, but I can't do that. And then you're like, you're just increasing that risk again. And it takes you out of orange flag or pink flag territory and it puts you fucking straight up into big, giant red flag. But we've dieted for 10 weeks to get here. I don't want to give up now. We've done this. And it just puts people in this really precarious position that I feel like we need to be doing more to say, hey, if you get to that position, don't just be pushing through and saying, well, okay, that's just how bodybuilding is. That's just what it takes. You know? It doesn't.
I do feel it's, in looking back at, and I've talked about my worst preps before, and shame on me for not recognizing those things, and also not shame on, maybe shame on, I'll throw shame.
Shame them all, Danika.
But I remember a simple 5 steps to get up to like the next platform of a building. There was multiple steps to get to the gym. And those 5 steps, it was like all my energy to get up those 5 steps. And I was like, this is just part of prep. The fuck it was. Like, the fact that I couldn't walk up like an elite athlete, not being able to get the energy to walk up 5 steps, something's wrong there. Like, something is not okay. And I remember my grandma actually being like, Danika, have you tanned yet? You look yellow. And I was like, yellow? Like, yellow? Me being like, oh, it must be part of prep. Like, but idiot. Like, now I can definitely be like, that was on me too. The fact that I was like, I'm okay. Like, this is just part of it. I kind of just really just been like, I succumbed, like went into the mold that everybody is trying to fit in, that it was supposed to be okay. And that must mean that I'm pushing really hard, and it must mean that like, I'm really going to do well. I did shitty. I didn't even place at that show. And I couldn't walk up steps. So the extent to which I was suffering did not equate to the placing of that event. Like, there was no correlation whatsoever. I did horrible. So I think being able to realize too, in yourself as an athlete, taking note of like, I'm about to fuck around with my body, and I'm going to push it to its limits. So I need to also be a responsible adult and take ownership of things and recognize when things don't feel good, and not just say, oh, this is part of it. Like, explore that stuff, challenge it, maybe do your own work, and then present it to your coach too, before just going right to your coach, who may just say, you got this. Good. Suffering's part of it. Because that's not okay.
Well, I think, and especially for a lot of prep coaches, people forget that my financial security is somewhat dependent on how you do.
Right.
And so if I put you through crazy shit that puts your health at risk, but it might create an opportunity for you to place better, well, did I do you well as a coach by putting you into a possibly very dangerous position so that you could maybe get an extra placement, or you can maybe do a little bit better at the show? Especially if then you never compete again too. I mean, obviously that was not any of us, but like, there are plenty of people that shoot, they will come out and they'll do great and then never compete again. Like, I wouldn't want to compete again if I thought that competition meant 800 calories and 2 hours of stairs every day, or tilapia and asparagus only. Like, nah, I definitely wouldn't ever want to compete again. But I know that that's not the case. And I think, like, yes, you have responsibility for it as an athlete, but in the same way that a child has responsibility for some of their own stuff, because you can't expect them to always know everything. And this is why having these conversations, and I think putting this kind of information out there, is so important. Not that everybody listens to us. I know I'm not that popular, but it's like, if there's a chance that we can have a talk about why these things put you at risk and are bad for your health and aren't good choices, and realistically don't make you look better anyways, at least in terms of peaking protocol stuff going into the show, then let's have those conversations. Let's put that information out there so that at least if you're going to make that decision, you can be like, yeah, fuck it, let's do it anyways.
Well, and it gives people the opportunity where maybe if they're like interviewing coaches or things like that, to ask about it. And if they're weird and cagey about it, like, maybe that's a red flag for how things are going to go throughout prep. If you're like, what's your opinion? I've seen this in the press. What's your opinion on this stuff? That could be something worth talking about and seeing like, what do they bring up? But I think asking more questions. And then the big thing was like, Danica, what stood out to me was what you were talking about with how like everything that is uncomfortable in prep then just gets blamed on prep. And then it's like, oh, it's not a big deal. But if there's something where in your gut, you're like, that doesn't seem right. Or like, it shouldn't be doing this. Or I don't think I want to do that. Then you have to listen to it, because it's like in the end, you're still the one making those decisions for yourself. And a vast majority of people are smart enough if they listen to their gut. You do know enough if you've been into this world. You've heard enough to where if there's just that little voice that's like, I don't know, like who takes diuretic pills anymore? And like, who's going to the store and ordering those off like whatever. If that doesn't sit right with you, then say something. And I mean, a good coach should be flexible enough and should be smart enough where they're able to then shift their approach with something. But like Stephen brought up the whole idea of being like in a place of authority and things like that. And I mean, yeah, like a coaching relationship, that's where that is with stuff. But it's still not something where you as the client or you as the consumer has to be like there's no amount of money that you're paying for coaching that should be worth it, where you're like, even though I hate this, I'm going to do it with stuff. You should still be putting your intuition and your health first and foremost.
Yeah. You had mentioned, and I was going to bring this up, this is a scary part that I have found about the interviewing process. For some reason, I do find that extreme people gravitate towards extreme coaches.
Yeah.
And incredibly naive people can mistakenly gravitate towards extreme coaches. And because I've been interviewed as a coach and had a client say, well, I just want to know, like, if push comes to shove and we have to go to 500 calories, will you do that? And me being like, no, I won't actually do that. And not being hired. And that's okay. Yeah. She was searching for someone that would be extreme with her and like not that they didn't give a fuck, but they matched that extreme not give a fuck level. And that's really, really scary, because that's like a really bad recipe for shit to happen. And I have seen that play out with like from me seeing some of my former competitors go with a more extreme coach. And then because I didn't push them, because I didn't feel comfortable enough, because what they were asking of me was, my values and my morals, it didn't line well with it. And now seeing them under other coaching with the extremeness that they wanted, now them coming back and being like, oh, I didn't realize that. I don't know if you guys have seen that play out.
I mean, I've been doing this a decade, like my entire life, like half of my career started out being the guy that people would talk to, and then they go with another coach, and then I'd 5, 6, 7, 8 months later, now they're signing up with me. Like, man, I did all this stuff and I went through all these things and it didn't pan out the way I wanted to, and I feel really bad and all this other stuff. And it's like, oh, okay. And granted, I think that was when, the sport was more popular back then, 5 years ago. And there were more people in bikini. And so, the other part is, it's like, a lot of coaches are good salespersons. Kind of have to be to some degree. I waited tables for a long time. I'm not a bad salesperson. I can be pretty convincing. You wouldn't even imagine how many people I've convinced that if you've smelled it, you've tasted it. Oh, yeah. See? That's not a fun one. But, so there's also this introductory call, if you even get one, if you even get a consult, where it's like, Yeah, I can probably sell people on some stuff if I really want to. Now, I specifically try not to and be very intentional about that. I find my opinion is that as a coach, my job is not to make decisions for you. It is to inform you. This decision is probably going to look like this. This decision is probably going to look like that. If you want to be successful with this, this is probably the approaches that we need to take and the things that we should do. These may be why. And if you want to do this other thing, then we need to consider these other parts of it. And then you, as an adult, can say, you know what? This is the right decision for me, and I can support you in that. The other thing is, it's glamorized. In what world is a sparkly, glamorous bikini on stage under the big lights in front of everybody not a glamorous thing? And so winning shows is glamorized. And so a lot of people will be like, oh, well, this person won this person did that. I'm going to hire them. And they might not even do research. They might not even understand. And that's also happens, I find, to a lot of people when they're first getting into the sport. I've been very few people's first coach. You know, I am normally somebody's second or third coach, depending, because they got into it with some things that really weren't great. And they're saying, you know, I'm not ready to give up on it yet because I still believe that there's a better way. And I think that's the trick. And like all things in society, it's kind of cyclical, right? Jinko jeans were out for a long time. Guess what? I've been seeing Jinko jean ads on Instagram lately. I didn't even know they still existed. Woo, you best bet. Let's go. But like keto. Keto was in, now it's out. It'll be in again in not too long. You know, high carb, it's been in and it's been out. Carnivore's been in and it's been out. And it's going to continue to be cyclical, right? The really bright neon colors, they were out for a long time and then they came back in, you know, some of the hairstyles. Like, so this idea of the coaching industry being pretty cyclical, I think, is also the case. Because when I got in at first, everybody was really concerned with scientific like approaches. This is when Lane Norton was blowing up on bodybuilding.com, talking about better ways, and if it fits your macros and flexible dieting was just getting started, and everybody was like, oh shit, new.
BDMJ was like everywhere, like
Yeah.
all the stuff. Yeah, was like where all the value was.
Yeah. And so everybody was like, oh, you mean I don't have to just eat tilapia and asparagus and, you know, do, you know, 2 hours of cardio every day and all this other stuff? And we were like, no, the research says that stuff, you know, is not necessary. Does it work? I mean, yeah, sure. Starving people's not, it doesn't take a lot, right? That's not rocket science to just starve yourself into getting lean. Is that the best way to, one, get lean while feeling is good and minimizing any possible negative health outcomes? No. Is that the best way to get lean and preserve as much muscle as possible? No. You know, so like, are there better ways and ways that we can do it to where it fits your lifestyle, your personality, like what's going on for you as an individual? Yes. But now, I don't see that as being something that people are paying attention to. I think in general, the scientific community has kind of gotten a big fuck you, right? People are very wary of scientists because they're in the swamp or some of that stuff. It's like, yeah, dude, but fucking, I've been doing this for a decade. I have a master's degree. Obviously, I've gone through the bullshit to prove I know and to be intentional. Like, yeah, but I really like this other person from Instagram because they're on Instagram and their videos are really pretty and
Their
they're
videos are really cool. Yeah.
it's like that idea that like nobody believed that Ted Bundy could possibly be a serial killer because he was so handsome. I mean, he's so good looking. He couldn't be a serial killer. He's such a nice boy. Like, get the fuck out of here, man. I'm ugly. I can know better, you know? So it's like, I also think we're in that shift away from that right now. And my hope is that the more we talk about it and why it's important in these things, that hopefully people start to care more about it again. And because I think people are more, because yes, some of the divisions, all the divisions have become more extreme over time. And so bodybuilding is a very small community in the idea of the world as a whole. And so things get normalized in bodybuilding that as soon as you leave bodybuilding are not normalized anymore. But because of the way that the community is, a lot of people that are in bodybuilding aren't necessarily the most social creatures. And maybe they don't have these huge friend groups and all this other stuff going on. And so you just get into that, and now that's all that you see and hear and do. And now that normalization is really having a big impact, when realistically some of the things that we're normalizing absolutely should not be.
Mic drop.
Drop. I know. Is it okay if we kind of go back to one thing?
Fuck yeah, go back.
Okay. I talking about like normalizing things, but then also Christina had mentioned just like the shift of maybe every like 5 years, or maybe I guess maybe even shorter amount of time, but things get more extreme or bigger, or like, and there has to be a point where, at least for me, if I look at like, let's just say bodybuilding, it looks like a freak show. Like, it doesn't even look this is to me. So like, this is my own opinion.
You're talking about open men's bodybuilding,
100%.
like the Olympia level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just gets like to a point where I'm like, oh my gosh, like how far do we push it, where we're saying that is the standard, and we're continuing to like up it and up it and up it, so much so that it's jeopardizing people's lives, right? Like, at what point is there enough? Like, do we just wait until enough bad shit happens and then we say it? Or like, are we that naive to like what is actually happening, and that it's a lot for the human body to have that much mass on you when you look like you are you don't look human anymore, right? So like, at what point should we start to make a little bit of a shift? And would that even happen? Because it makes me a little nervous. There has not been that. Like, yes, bikini we talked about, and like going into fit model, but there has to be people talking about this, right? Like, there has to be.
But then it made me think of what are they called? The games that are coming up, the like untested Olympics.
The Hunger Games?
Huh?
The Hunger Games?
No. There's something where there's a picture of this guy who is a swimmer, and I forget what he was before, but he's competing in swimming in these like untested games. And so they're basically encouraging the use of like anything and everything to be able to perform as superhuman as possible at this stuff. And like, my husband the guy had popped up because when this picture first came out, it was everywhere. And so Vic was like, oh my God, doesn't he look so cool? And like, the guy does look like a fucking action figure, like straight from Target. Like, that's exactly what he looks like. But I was like, I mean, it looks kind of weird. Like, I mean, he looks great, right? Like, he's worked really hard and everything. Now, like, do normal people want to do that? I don't think the normal person is going to put in the effort, because there's also the mistaking, like, ideology that like these people just take these drugs and then all of a sudden you're like, poof, and then you grow into, that's not how it works. They're still putting in an insane amount of work. But like, things like that are coming for the sake of entertainment value, right? And being put on TV, because a shit ton of people are going to go back to watching like cable TV or whatever these games are going to be on, to watch essentially freaks of nature go and perform athletic stunts, right? And so I don't think that we're yet at the place where it's like we want to say enough. And if anything, it's more, it seems like people are craving it more.
Well, that's human nature to crave it more, though, right? Like, that is, there's a psychological component of like, I could do that better. I could one up that. I could hold my breath longer. I can swim underwater longer, and like, doing better, right? But like,
I mean, that's done a lot of good for us as a species, right, over time.
Absolutely.
Like, if we didn't have that drive,
but then you think about, but there has to be like, I think that there's probably a point in time where your intellect actually decreases because your drive or your ego is so high that
Right.
it like completely eliminates the intelligent, reasonable decisions that need to come into play in order to do the one more thing.
It's like an Icarus bell curve, right?
Yes.
Like we talked
Yeah.
about him a while ago. And I feel like like at a certain point, we do have to hit somewhere in the bell curve where like we've hit peak entertainment value, peak value, peak like what's possible value, all of that. And then as we go past it, that's where we run into more of this kind of stuff. And it goes back to that where the crazy peaking protocols, I mean, I can't know 100% because no coach who has their client die is going to go out there and share what was going on, right? But it makes me
And unless they didn't do anything wrong,
right.
and then
Unless
they
it
would share
had nothing to
everything.
do with them, right? But like it makes me
Wild.
wonder, was this a rush job? You know, where like they weren't ready. And so then it was like, well, let's just add in extra shit and we're going to pull stuff because we were rushing things along, right? So then conversations probably need to be had about like more conversations about how you're ready sooner. Peaking should not be the time that your body changes a whole lot. Like you shouldn't look that different from one week to the next. And so if you're not there, you're not there. But I don't know.
I think it turns to cost benefit. Like it's a
Right.
cost benefit analysis, like when we're talking about these really crazy things, okay? So in entertainment could even be one, because this is where I think people get desensitized to this stuff. If I'm always on I threw my phone somewhere because that's what I do. But if I'm always on my phone looking at pictures of jacked people that are shredded, probably on PEDs, well, guess what? I'm now desensitized to that.
Right.
So what I used to think was really jacked, I no longer think is jacked anymore. I'm like, oh, well, they're in okay shape, but they don't really have that much muscle. Now that guy has a lot of muscle. And then you're like, that definition changes because of the desensitization. And this is where I think the big changes happen for a lot of people. Like when I was a kid, if you wanted to see something risque, you had to hope that you could see it through the fuzz late night at 2 or 3 a.m. You know what I mean? Or there were just a couple of shows where you're like, oh, good Lord, a girl in a bikini top. And so that was like, woo, you know? It's like back in the 50s and the flapper girls, like, oh, like a little bit of ankle, you know what? Like, oh, wait, we don't see that very much. And so with social media, especially like how many people follow influencers that are always talking about being pretty and all the and facial stuff with the filters and all this other stuff. And so now the expectation, and this is what a lot of people are um, worried about with AI, right? The Sydney Sweeney thing and the beauty standard stuff that people are arguing about right now. It's like, but that's not real. That can't be real. People don't actually look like that. You're getting the lighting, you're getting the this, you're doing the that. And so, like, when I came to muscularity and really muscle bound dudes, like, yeah, I might see He Man, but I only saw He Man for 30 minutes on a Saturday morning when I was watching the cartoons when they were on TV. I wasn't as exposed to it as now. That He Man kind of persona and view, that look of fitness and body image is everywhere all the time. Like, so now when I used to think that, oh yeah, my dad's a big, strong guy, now I'm like, oh man, my dad was really small. You know what I mean? And so that desensitization happens over time. And I do think that that is a big part of it and why it's important to like be very intentional about how much of the media that you're intaking and putting in front of yourself all the time. Because if you're, and I think this is part of why the sport does what it does in terms of just kind of getting a bit more extreme over time. Because if I'm always at shows, always looking at really muscular people, who are the only ones that begin to stand out? It's the ones that are more muscular or that are more conditioned, right? It's just human nature to get desensitized to that to some degree. And so I think that's where we have to be careful, like in terms of that psychological uh, impact and being able to actually step back and do the cost benefit analysis, right? What is the cost of me doing this peaking protocol? And this obviously means that you have to actually know what the possible costs are. What are the risks? What are the benefits? What am I going to get out of this? And that just doesn't happen. Yeah, it goes back to something I've said a while back. How many people now have 5-year plans? Because a 5 and a 10 and a 20-year plan for life used to be very normal things that people would talk about. I remember being like 12 And hearing adults talk about, yeah, this is my 5-year plan. I cannot tell you the last time one of my friends or colleagues or anybody has been like, this is my plan for the next 5 years and where I want to be and like what I'm working towards. One of you has to say something.
I was like trying to find my little button. I was like, Danica, hurry. And then you can't get the mute button fast enough. Yeah, I do. And I mean, that's one of those skills that we try to work with people on, right? Is getting back to being able to think that way. And I think that's just another symptom of like the go, 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 what's happening now? What can you do? Like kind of place that we've been in where it's like, well, I don't want to think about how this is going to affect me in a year. All I know is I want it right now and I'm ready to do it. And so then they get like very into it. And so, that's one of the questions I like to ask, like in consults right away, where I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do in like 3 months? And what do you want to do in a year? And what do you want to do 3 years from now? And like, where do those all line up? Because if it's like, well, in 3 months, I want to lose 20 pounds. And then within a year, I want to have competed 3 times. And in 3 years, I want to be pregnant. I'm like, okay, like let's talk about how we're going to lay this out. And so you have to kind of look at how we're planning those. And I do think that that's been a problem, that people don't get to that stuff anymore. And it almost makes me think of like even like planners, where like everything is digital now, everything's loaded onto your phone. And even in those situations, it's harder to look at a 3-year long range plan or whatever on your little phone screen than it used to be if you had like your notebook with like a vision board drawn out and like things like that. And so I think we have lost that forward thinking or like the value of the like step to step. And then that's where like I've talked before about like the maturity in these processes that people find as clients and as athletes and stuff like that, that they do start to think ahead of, okay, well, if I want to do this thing, then my training cycle is going to be this long. Then I'll be, peaking for that for this long, recovering for that. And then all of a sudden, your plans take up a lot more time. People will think like, oh, well, I want to do a show. So it's a 12-week prep and it's July. So I should be able to do that by November. And it's like, okay, well, what if we actually wanted to make sure that we, worked together for somewhere about 8 to 12 weeks before we dive into the prep to make sure we're in a good spot? Then let's say we're prepping for something more like 16 to 24 weeks. And then after that, we're going to want to reverse diet from there. That's probably going to take another 12 to 24 weeks to get us back into a really good spot. I just laid out like 18 months of your fucking life. Like if we go on the long end of that, but the thought process is like, well, I just really want to do it before I turn this certain age, or I really want to do it before the adrenaline wears off and I just want to dive in. And I think that's where we get more into the mindset of like, well, I wasn't originally planning on trying those kinds of things, but I really want to get my pro card before I'm competing in the 45 and up class. And so, like, yeah, maybe I am willing to fuck around and find out for a year of adding protocols in that I don't really understand. And it's that like urgency that I think leads us into situations where we're making poor decisions.
And I think this is a point that I think a lot of people talk about the virilization aspect, or I'm hearing a lot of people talk about the virilization aspect for females with PEDs and that being a risk factor. And so I feel like what I'm seeing and hearing now is that this idea of minimizing risk is the same as eliminating risk, which it is not, right? Those are not the same things. And so a lot of people are taking this idea of, okay, the people who are minimizing risks, possibly, if they are eliminating risks, but that's not the case. And even so, like virilization is not the only possible risk or side effect that you have with some of these things. And so we're also not talking about that, which kind of goes into, I think, those longer term health risks that we kind of touched on a little bit that I didn't really get into too much, where it's like, that's still something that should be considered. Like, okay, cool. what if I do have, famous person had a heart attack at 61 and they were a pro wrestler. And so what did pro wrestlers do a ton of throughout their career so they could keep up with demands? PEDs, steroids. Do you think that those two things aren't somehow connected? Do you think that years of use of those things didn't increase risk for that cardiac event? Christina, I'm going to fight you if you don't mute when you type. It's like, okay, that's the real Steven.
It's my loud ass hand, sorry.
But like, that's what you kind of have to keep in mind is, and this is I think one of my really big points is like, there's so much shit that's just not being talked about. And it's being minimized and it's being normalized. And the truth of the matter is like, for me as a coach, like it hasn't necessarily put me at risk. But for a lot of you guys out there, as athletes or clients or whatever, competitors, yada, yada, it does put you at risk for something, and it's not fucking being talked about. So if it's not being talked about, it's not being discussed, and you're not being informed, how can you expect you to make the decision that's actually going to be best for you? Because if you're like, risks are worth it, like you gotta risk it for the biscuit, let's go. Great, you got to make that decision that was best for you. Cool, that's awesome. Like, doesn't matter if that's what I would do or not. That's great for you. But that's not what's happening for most people. What's happening for most people is they're getting into something's happening, and then all this stuff that they didn't even know that they could expect, or even some of it, starts raining down, and it wasn't stuff they wanted to happen. It wasn't stuff they were willing to deal with, and now there you are in the thick of it because we didn't fucking talk about it.
When do you think those conversations should be happening? Should the coach be bringing them up in situations? Should the onus be on the client? Like, how do we get this rolling? Like, how do we, as like even just the three of us, decide that we want to try and contribute to the solution?
Well, I think that the conversation needs to start with the person, if I'm being honest. I feel like it needs to be, ooh, this is interesting to me. And then that person also needs to say, I'm curious about this, so I'm going to do some research first, right? Before being like, oh, that family has some kids, I'm going to have some kids. Like, there's a lot that goes into that. Like, there's a lot of stuff. You should probably...
Not really.
Well,
it's pretty simple, actually.
There's only one thing that goes into that. But you set me up so nicely. That was really good. That was perfect. Anyways, I think I've had a good one like that in a while.
I hope that's the clip for social media.
I hope it is, because it's nothing like the podcast.
You'll have no idea what they're getting into. Oh, that's hilarious.
But I think it needs to start with the individual who is interested in the endeavor that they're exploring, right? Like, that is the conversation that needs to happen prior to, and then put another person into it, or just continue to be curious. And we've talked about this before, about the power of just curiosity, like just be curious about things before. And I would say another thing that people should consider, ask about what are the negative things that can happen? What's the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
What is like the worst thing that could possibly happen if I go into this? Because I think a lot of the times people are like, what did you like about it? What did you do? And when you got started, when you were on stage, did it feel so good to, like, you were so shredded and so lean, and like, how did that feel? Was it really good? Like, instead of being like, tell me the worst things that could possibly happen if I go after this, and then from there say like, okay, and what are things that could minimize those risks? Like, what are things that are really exciting about it? Like, just be very reasonable in your communication skills and ask a lot of questions.
So I think this is something that now, because things have changed, works against me a little bit more when I'm talking to competitors and I'm doing consults. because I am very upfront with them about the reality of things. And so if like somebody comes to me and like, hey, I want to compete in this division with this league, I'm like, well, I want you to know something, that if you're trying to be competitive, this is what that takes. And I don't do that stuff, so I'm not going to be the coach for you anyways, right? And these are some of the things that you need to be concerned of or aware of when going through the process. That's not a salesman-y kind of thing. Like, it is not good for sales for somebody to come give me money for me to be like, oh, well, you got to worry about all these things. You know, it's important. Sometimes for a lot of people, this isn't, you know, it's not always the best thing, or we have to be really aware of how to go into it. Whereas somebody is like, absolutely, yeah, we can do that. I got you. We're going to do this, and it's going to happen. Like, there's a difference there in terms of how we frame that. And I think this is where people get into trouble, because things can get framed as very easy, like very straightforward. And honestly, my opinion is that if I can talk you out of doing a show, you shouldn't be doing a show in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So realistically, I can be pretty confident that if I give you all the possible negative feedback, or I give you the, hey, these are the things we need to worry about, and I'm very upfront and honest with you, and you're still like, hell yeah, let's do this. I'm like, cool, you're ready. You're in the headspace to do this, because this isn't easy, and it doesn't mean we're going to make it harder than it needs to be, but we're damn sure going to, like, still have to work. You know, like, where does that line lie for how hard we push and how hard we don't push? You know, where's that orange to red flag crossover happening? So if I can talk to you about all the stuff that matters and you're still like psyched about it, I'm like, you're my person. Like, this is where we line up on it. But people, I've found, don't like that right now. They are not big fans. And so it's one of those things where it's like, all right, cool. And that's where it becomes difficult, because it's very easy to fall into that temptation of, I can just maybe flub some stuff. Maybe I'll smooth over some hard lines with you. Maybe we won't talk about some certain things, because my financial security is part of this conversation to some degree. And that's where I think the coaching industry and this health and fitness industry and stuff like that becomes a hard part, because we are treating people like very trustworthy sources when they are making money off of what they're selling us. I make a living off of a coaching service that I sell to my clients. Like, they should all have concern that I may have ulterior motives, and that, like, there could be things that I'm not necessarily hiding from them, or I'm not necessarily being upfront with them about, because I want them to financially invest in that service. And that, I feel like, is not a mindset that a lot of people have going into those coaching conversations. Not one that I see very often at all.
I think it
I'm
depends
fucking
on
a
what they
terrible
hear.
salesman.
You know, I think it depends on what they hear back from the conversation on whether or not they think that way. And so if it kind of feeds into what they were already looking for and what they were thinking they wanted to do and what their comfort level was and their understanding is, then it's like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. This person's not trying to sell me anything crazy. This is straightforward. Whereas there's a lot more opportunity if someone's like, well, actually, did you think about this? Did you think about that? There's more layers to it. We need more time, meaning we need more money, for them to then start to be like, she wants to have this much more, and so, like, that's full of shit. We don't need that long. And, like, then they start to think that way, right? Is like the hard part. And so I do wish that we just in general had less. No, what I was going to say, I immediately could devil's advocate. I was going to say, I I want people to be super discerning. I do wish we approached things with a more positive light if we get news that it doesn't exactly flow with what we were looking for. And instead of thinking this person's trying to pull one over on me, that instead, like Danica was saying, we get curious and then we research it and then we decide, okay, is this person just trying to get more time, or is this truly what I need? Like that kind of stuff.
I think it's two ways, a positive and a negative way, to facilitate that same curiosity of learning. Because it's not necessarily that it's super important to be positive about it or super important to be negative about it in terms of whether I believe someone's trying to get one over on me or help me out. The important thing is that I am learning and educating myself so that I can make an informed decision on what I'm putting myself into. Because education, understanding, and learning is what gives you the sniffer so you can sniff the sniff test. So you can recognize, does it walk like a duck? Does it quack like a duck? Right? Or, oh, wow, that thing's mooing. Definitely not a duck. But it's hard to know that if you don't know what a moo and a quack are. Because there's a lot of quacks in this industry. Oh, yeah.
That was so perfectly set up for you. I appreciate it. Okay, well, I feel like at 80 minutes, we probably got to call
Yeah, we got to
this
stop.
one. But I mean, it's one of those that we could go forever if we really just kind of let it go where it flows with stuff. So if this brought up any ideas or any questions you have or anything you want us to cover, throw it our way and we will travel that path with you. And you know where to reach us. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Booyah.